Please extend my thanks to the chair and be gracious in accepting my remarks. Now I am recognizing the distinguished member of the subcommittee, Jasmine Crockett, whose presence and counsel I value as we move through the matters before us. Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, for the opportunity to speak today and for the courtesy that accompanies our deliberations. To begin with, I would like to share news that, astonishing as it may seem to some, marks a new moment in our national life. Guess what? Joe Biden is no longer president. And with that, one might imagine we ought to turn our attention toward fresh possibilities rather than cling to whatever memories or echoes of the past still linger in our halls. Yet I have a sense that many of us, and perhaps many around us, still perceive the world as if we were living in yesterday's stories, when conversations about how things used to be filled the room more than discussions about what we must do right now. We need to talk seriously about how we will craft the laws that shape our present and future, because in my view, some of my colleagues have confused the purpose of this chamber. We are not here to adjudicate every claim as if we were sitting inside a courtroom, nor to conduct endless proceedings to determine what is true and what is not, or to establish, on our own, the exact contours of every fact, and whom should be sued and whom should not. Our duty is different and higher. We are legislators, entrusted with writing the statutes that govern our country, not conducting private judicial inquiries or acting as roving juries in the public square. If I may, I will remind you of a line that one great American figure, a respected senator from New Jersey, voiced yesterday as he broke the record for the number of speeches delivered in this chamber. He suggested that our discourse should not revolve around a clash between left and right, but rather around a struggle between what is right and what is wrong. I am speaking of that idea because I want us to anchor our work in the simple, enduring distinction between right and wrong, and to keep that distinction at the center of our debates and our decisions. In that same breath, I want to acknowledge why so many Americans find it hard to trust their institutions today. The erosion of trust, I fear, is driven in large part by those who lead us, and by the way our norms are applied, or sometimes selectively applied. I have said before, and I will repeat, that the two of us, myself and the chair, largely share a concern for this issue, even though we do not always agree on every detail. We both recognize that there has been a sharp decline in the sense of security and in the perceived safety of those who serve the public in this capital. And we understand that such a perception takes a toll on the confidence of the people we represent. Regardless of which side of the aisle you occupy, we both know and acknowledge that as current members of Congress, we face a far greater number of death threats than anyone else in this country. That reality should compel us to temper our tone, to measure our rhetoric, and to protect the institutions we serve, rather than to weaponize fear in pursuit of partisan advantage. And yet I fear that such fears can be exploited, and I will be forthright about my disagreements with some proposed tactics. I intend to be honest in my remarks. There are moments when I will urge a different course than the one that has been proposed, and I will call out what I perceive as attempts to frame a respectable principle as just another form of political warfare. I know that for some members of this chamber, the approach of turning public officials into televised spectacles or into fodder for sensational headlines has a certain appeal. But to me, that approach is dishonorable, because the subject at hand, our nation's law enforcement leadership, occupies the highest office in this land's public safety apparatus. People watch, listen, and absorb what they are told, and they are apt to take for gospel what they hear spoken in the heat of contentious debate. When a member chooses to exercise his or her right to free speech and assume the role of critic, the result should not be a deliberate effort to politicize matters that should be treated with seriousness and restraint. I do not believe in turning a respected law enforcement official into a partisan issue, nor do I think it right to encourage or entertain threats as a means of advancing a political narrative. And I must say plainly that I harbor no fondness for Elon Musk, a sentiment I will not hide. I will repeat that sentiment as many times as it takes, because I believe in speaking frankly about such matters, even when the conversation becomes uncomfortable or controversial. There is something about him that unsettles me from the start, a sense that power has distorted his judgment and given him license to cast people aside without a second thought, simply because he can. An aura of ease with firing those who depend on their work for their livelihoods. I am troubled by the impression that he is playing fast and loose with the truth, and I suspect deception behind his confident veneer, because it seems as if the rest of us must always remain passive while he manipulates the system to secure federal contracts for himself or for those who stand with him, as if outcomes could be bought by will alone. The rest of us appear unable to raise our voices high enough to compel accountability, unable to enlist the authority of law enforcement as if it were a private instrument at his disposal rather than a public trust. And the result is a hollow feeling that someone operates above and beyond the ordinary rules that govern everyone else. He has money in abundance, money that seems to give him a sense of immunity. And with that aura of wealth comes a belief that the ordinary rules do not apply to him or to those who share his circle, which troubles me deeply because it contradicts the idea that justice is blind and universal. On the day of my birthday, I witnessed peaceful demonstrations spanning the globe, protests that spoke truth to power and reminded us all that civic life is nourished by courage and restraint alike. Demonstrations that, in their quiet dignity, underscored that the problem we face is not merely a matter of policy, but of a moral stance. No one should sit in a position of influence and threaten a sitting member of Congress, especially when that member has shown a readiness to seek counsel and to insist that lawful processes be observed. I would urge any protesting voices to consult lawyers who can guide them through the rights and responsibilities that accompany protest, not to fuel chaos, but to preserve the integrity of the pursuit. There is a sense that those who cast such shadows over the proceedings are not satisfied with lawful outcomes. The letters that have reached other city officials from this new Department of Justice send a troubling message that vengeance, not enforcement of the law, is the agenda, and that interpretation unsettles the very foundation of equal justice under law. Our nation and our political discourse are frayed because we have forgotten how to align on what is right, how to listen as much as we speak, and how to resist the urge to reduce every debate to a partisan clash rather than a shared search for truth and fairness. What we ask for is a system where law enforcement acts with impartiality when confronted with genuine crime, where investigators are called upon to pursue real wrongdoing, whether it is cybercrime or crimes against children or robberies, without bias, fear, or hesitation, and where the pursuit of justice is not colored by who is in office or which party holds power. We should not permit anyone to assume that people who do not resemble them or who hold different identities deserve less consideration, less protection, or less dignity in the eyes of investigators or in the corridors of justice, especially when an administration's stances appear to minimize diversity, equality, and inclusion, or to devalue the everyday reality faced by everyday people. That is precisely why I stand for someone who embodies what I need in a colleague and in a public servant, a presence that recognizes the humanity of all who come before the system and who refuses to let prejudice shape the outcome of any case, any inquiry, or any verdict. And so I offer a personal memory that I return to with gratitude and resolve. When I first began serving as a public defender, I did not come to the task with years of criminal defense experience on my resume, but with a straightforward conviction about what I could contribute and why it mattered. I walked into my supervisor's office and expressed my readiness to join the team, and I was asked a simple, pointed question about my qualifications. I answered honestly and with conviction, stating that my determination sprang from more than skill alone. It sprang from the fact that I am Black, an identity that is not a burden but a well of lived insight and responsibility. My supervisor looked at me as though I were testing the bounds of possibility, and I did not retreat from the moment, because I knew that the real gift I brought was a level of understanding and empathy that might not be obvious to every colleague, yet was essential to truly representing every client. Charlie, my boss, gave me a chance, and once I stepped into that role, I devoted myself fully to serving all of my clients with steadfast diligence, fairness, and respect, striving not only to aid those who shared my background, but to stand with anyone who needed advocacy and a voice in the courtroom. That is what service means. Thank you. Today on Capitol Hill, the atmosphere had grown almost electric, and Congresswoman Jasmine Crockett moved with a measured intensity that reminded everyone who wields the power to write the nation's laws. From the very start, Crockett delivered a statement that took the room by surprise. Attention! Joe Biden is no longer president. That unveiling set the tone for what followed, a speech not aimed at rehashing the past but at calling out the present failures of her colleagues. She insisted that the task before them was simple in its purpose, yet daunting in its magnitude. The Congress must pass laws, not stage political trials in the glare of live television. Crockett's critique cut through the chatter with a sharp edge, as she condemned what she called fake outrage and accused the Republican side of clinging to history rather than attending to the duties of today. She argued that the party was confusing a courtroom drama with the constitutional obligations that belong to it, and she pressed the point that the nation deserved governance grounded in law rather than performances for the cameras. Yet the speech's true crescendo came when she turned her attention to the Attorney General, charging her with turning the office into a tool of political revenge. Crockett contended that the Attorney General had weaponized what she labeled fake news in order to obscurely threaten her for exercising her right to speak freely. And then she pivoted to Elon Musk, unreserved in her critique. She did not hold back, naming him as a fraud in her view, accusing him of acts that cross legal boundaries, and condemning what she described as federal protection and favorable treatment extended to his enterprises. She tied these accusations to the most recent protests surrounding Musk, expressing relief that people were peacefully resisting what she perceived as an unchecked exercise of corporate power without accountability. The underlying message Crockett pressed into the air was unmistakable. This was not a clash between left and right, but a confrontation between what is right and what is wrong. She warned that rhetoric capable of inflaming division, the selective enforcement of laws, and political threats from above threatened to rend the country apart. She argued that the Department of Justice must attend to justice itself, not to vengeance masquerading as justice. The speech culminated in a personal note about why public service matters, a testament drawn from her own life. Crockett recalled her first job as a public defender, a position to which she was drawn because she offered a perspective of understanding and compassion that others had not brought to the table. In her words, that is what service looks like when it is lived day by day. It was, she said, a blend of passion, caution, and a grounded sense of reality. And it was a reminder that behind every headline and behind every hearing lies a deeper struggle for what fairness and democracy ought to mean in contemporary America. You are watching Union Archives, where truth meets truth.